All right, let's take a look at the New York Jets. Jets, Jets, and see what did they do during the 2018 offseason. Remember, this is going to include both free agency and the draft. Did the Jets manage to improve their roster from last season? Well, let's start by looking at their cap situation. My goodness, they had $84 million at the beginning of the off-season. That is a huge number. It was more than almost any team in the NFL, other than maybe like Cleveland and the 49ers. I mean, they had a huge amount of cap space that they had carried over. And then at the end of the, or sort of the beginning of training camp, towards the end of the off season, they had $17 million in cap space remaining. So they spent a lot of money. What did they do? And did they improve their team after spending so much money? Well, let's take a look. But before we do, I want to talk about some players that I thought at the beginning of the offseason were in jeopardy of being cut. Let's see what ended up happening. One player I thought might get cut, that everyone thought might get cut, was Muhammad Wilkerson. There was definitely a falling out, so to speak. So, you can see here the numbers where he had 69 tackles, 64 tackles in 2015, with 12 sacks. And then in 2016, a little bit of a drop off, 58 tackles, 4.5 sacks. And then last year, 46 tackles, 3.5 sacks, 2 tackles for a loss. Everybody said that his attitude was bad. He was a cancer to the locker room. I think he was showing up late. He was checked out, which really is amazing for a guy who was supposed to get a lot of money. He was due a very big salary in 2018, but they decided to go ahead and cut him. I mean, it ended up creating $9 million in dead cap space for the Jets, but even despite that, it still freed up about $11 million. So, I mean, he had a big salary, and then what did he do? He ended up signing a 1-year, $5 million deal with Green Bay. So he cost himself a lot of money, but I guess he just didn't want to be in New York anymore, and he's not. So, Muhammad Wilkerson is out. Matt Forte is another guy who I expected might get cut. He ended up retiring. That saved the Jets $3 million in cap space. He was a 32-year-old running back, and you can see the numbers start to fall off a cliff. I mean, look at there. He had 9 years, basically. 9 years, where he averaged 1,000 yards a season over that time span, over those 9 years. But even then, you can see, starting in 2013, the numbers starting to fall. 1,339, 9 touchdowns. 1,038 yards, 6 touchdowns. 898 yards, 4 touchdowns. 813 yards. He did have 7 touchdowns that first year with the Jets, but then last year, 381 yards and 2 touchdowns. You can see the yards per carry starting to fall from 4.9, 4.6, 3.9, 3.7. So he was just steadily getting older and older and less effective, and he decided to hang it up, and it's hard to blame him. Those running backs, they take a beating. So Matt Forte is retired, but he was a great player for many, many years. James Carpenter is a guy that I thought might be at risk of getting cut. I guess not. They haven't cut him. They expect him to be the starting guard. So, if he is playing at the level he's capable of playing at, then, $4.7 million is not a bad deal for a good, effective guard. But we'll see. We'll see how he performs next season. Buster Skrine, another guy I thought maybe might get cut. Nickel cornerback, would save $6 million in the final year of his deal. But looks like maybe those two guys will both be back. So, they weren't actually cut, at least not yet. So now let's look at the offensive unrestricted free agents. The guys that, contributed on offense but could have signed with any team in this offseason. Josh McCown is an important name. Very efficient quarterback. Didn't quite hit that 3,000-yard mark, but had 67% completion percentage, 18 touchdowns to 9 interceptions. He had a good year. But the guy's going to be 39 this season. I don't think that he should be the team starter personally. But what most people are saying is that either McCown will be the starter or Donald will be the starter. I'm rooting for Bridgewater. I really am, but it seems like a lot of people think that he's going to be used as trade bait, which makes sense because, the Jets guaranteed McCown $10 million. They gave him a raise to come back for another season. Who's going to want to trade for a guy who's probably in the last year of his career? Who wants a 39-year-old quarterback who's not going to be their future and, who doesn't even throw for 3,000 yards? I don't know. So he's not really very valuable on the trade market. They're not going to get rid of Sam Darnold. So, the obvious choice, that maybe they'll keep all three. I don't know. But, it'll be interesting to see. What does Josh McCown do? $10 million for a backup is quite a lot. They've already guaranteed his salary for the year. But their other two guys, when you think about it, the other two guys combined aren't getting paid that much. So their three quarterbacks combined are going to be making less than $20 million. So they could keep all three. We'll see. Austin Safarian Jenkins was their tight end last year. He's never had 400 yards receiving. Last year was a career year for him. 50 catches, 357 yards. Seems like he's bounced back from his early troubles that he had when I think he was struggling with alcohol abuse. He was drafted in the second round by Tampa. Had some rough years there. But, I don't know. Jacksonville signed him for 2 years and $10 million. I thought that was interesting, an interesting choice. He seems to be trending up. He'll be in the 5th year of his career, entering those peak years. Seems like he's got things straightened out in his life. Maybe it'll work out for Jacksonville, but I don't necessarily blame the Jets for not wanting to match that. I don't really blame him. But let's look at who else was a free agent. They got Wesley Johnson, who was the starting center, first-year starter. Disappointed mightily. All right. He struggled both at run blocking and pass blocking. He was playing on a second-year tender that was worth $2.7 million, and he just didn't work out. So he ended up signing with Detroit for 1 year at $880,000, but he won't be in New York this season. How will they replace him? We'll talk about it in just a little bit. Another center they had on their roster last year was Jonathan Harris. He had his struggles as well, but Coach Bowles was pleased with his effort. They brought him back on a 1-year, $880,000 deal after last year he played on a 1-year, $850,000 deal. So, that's backup money. That's third string money, really. So he probably won't be the starter. He almost definitely will not be the starting center for the Jets in 2018, but he'll be back. He'll be back. And another interior lineman who was a free agent was Dakota Dozier. He was a guard who started a couple of games late in the season on the interior. He can play multiple positions inside. He just finished his rookie contract after being drafted in the 4th round. And the Jets got him for $880,000. So another kind of backup player deal. That's sort of what a backup guard is going to get. So let's see the defensive unrestricted free agents. Who were the guys that contributed on defense last season that were up for free agency? Demario Davis is a big name. 29 years old. Was drafted by the Jets back in 2012, but after he finished his rookie contract, which, look, his second, third, and fourth year, he played all right. He did well. But then he went to Cleveland, where he had 99 tackles in 16 games, but they decided to send him back to the Jets in exchange for Calvin Pryor, actually, who was then later released because he was fighting with a teammate. So the Cleveland ended up giving up Demario Davis for a guy that they, cut because of behavior problems. And then what did he end up doing? He ended up killing it for the Jets. 135 tackles, had the best season of his career. 5 sacks, 9 tackles for a loss, did well in coverage. He was an all-around linebacker last year. But here's the thing, he's 29 years old. These are sort of the last of his peak years, and New Orleans signed him for 3 years and $24 million. I mean, if he performs next year and the year after at the same level he did, this past year, well, that will be a good deal, $8 million a year. But he's not young. So it's a little bit of a risk, and I can understand why the Jets decided to let him walk, even though he had such a great season. Morris Claiborne is a cornerback. He had a great season early on. He shut down Julio Jones, but then he got banged up and had some struggles in the later part of the season. Last year he played on a 1-year, $5 million deal. That proved to be a pretty great value for the Jets. And he signed another 1-year deal, this one worth $7 million. So he'll be back with the Jets again next season. Another couple of free agents on the defensive line, Tony Ely and Mike Pennell. Tony Ely had really good seasons with the Panthers. I don't really understand why they cut him, to be honest with you. I mean, they did have a pretty deep defensive line there, but he provided really good depth. You can see he had 32 tackles and 5 sacks in both 2015 and 2016. Those are good numbers for a defensive end. But maybe they sensed something, maybe they knew something. And last year with the Jets, he had 14 tackles and 1 sack. So a pretty big drop-off there after he finished his rookie contract. He was signed by Dallas, who signed him for 1 year and $1.2 million. So We'll see if he can have a bounce back year, but it won't be with the Jets. Mike Pennell played in the middle there at nose tackle, performed well, was playing on a 1-year deal worth $990,000, and he played well enough to get a raise, a pretty hefty raise, 3 years, $10.5 million. So those are, good numbers to get for a guy who's just making $990,000. And he's in line to get a bigger role now that Wilkerson is gone. So we'll see how he's able to perform as a starter, or possibly as a starter. David Bass was a linebacker who was sort of a backup guy. 15 tackles, 3.5 sacks. Not horrible. He got a little bit of a raise there, a little baby raise, was making $775,000. But then next year will make $880,000. Julian Stanford was a backup guy, big-time special teams player. He was making an average of $725,000 a year, but he received a 2-year, $3 million deal with Buffalo. So he got a nice little raise, doubled his salary. Terrence Brooks is a safety, primarily played on special teams, was a reserve safety there for the Jets. Finished his rookie contract, was a 3rd-round pick by Baltimore in 2014, and the Jets decided to bring him back for 2 years and $4 million. So Terrence Brooks will be back as well. Let's summarize all of the big changes on the Jets roster this offseason. First of all, Bryce Petty and Christian Hackenberg gone. So those experiments are over. Jets wasted draft picks on those guys. In comes Teddy Bridgewater in free agency, former Vikings quarterback, and then they traded up. They traded a lot to get Sam Darnold. And, if Sam Darnold proves to be who they think he is, then, maybe it will be worth it. But the Jets traded an awful lot to trade up to get Sam Darnold. So, they are really all in on Sam Darnold. But before we talk, more about that, let's look at Teddy Bridgewater's numbers. He missed all of 2016 with a torn ACL, catastrophic knee injury. Many people thought his career was going to be over. He basically missed all of 2017 too. I think he played in one game, a couple snaps. He basically missed the last 2 seasons with a catastrophic knee injury. But the 2 years before that, his first 2 seasons, he did pretty well. He averaged 3,000 yards passing, had nearly 65% completion. And the Jets signed him for $6 million. I'm really rooting for him. I would love to see them start Teddy Bridgewater. But most people think what's going to happen is that they're going to use him as trade bait and try to get some kind of draft pick and give him to a team that's really QB needy. So we'll see what happens. I'm a big Teddy Bridgewater fan. I'd love to see him be able to bounce back, but we'll see. The other option besides McCown, who they brought back, is Sam Darnold. But, my gosh. They moved up 3 spots, and they gave up 3 second-round picks. Not a small price to pay, but we'll see. We'll see what happens there with Sam Darnold. Matt Forte is out at running back, but like I said, he didn't provide that much last season. Isaiah Crowell is in. They gave him 3 years and $12 million. Not a small amount of money, $4 million a year, but you're talking about a guy who did well. You know, he averaged over 4 yards a carry in his rookie contract, 952 yards and 7 touchdowns, 4.8 yards a carry, had a big season in 2016. Last year had 853 yards, still averaged 4.1 yards a carry. I think he's a great addition to that running back room. I really do. I think he's a really good pickup. They also brought in Thomas Rawls from Seattle. He'll be competing for a spot there as the number 3 running back. And also they drafted Trenton Cannon in the 6th round. So we'll see who ends up with that number 3 running back spot. But I do believe the Jets have upgraded at running back. At wide receiver, Jeremy Curley is out. He was their number 4 wide receiver last year. And in comes Terrell Pryor, who was a big disappointment there in Washington. Signed a pretty big contract. I can't remember. I think it was $6 million or $10 million. I don't remember. But he had 1,000 yards receiving in Cleveland. Remember, Terrell Pryor used to be a quarterback, converted into a wide receiver after not making it. He originally got drafted by Oakland to be a quarterback. He switched over to wide receiver. In his second year at wide receiver, had 1,000 yards receiving, but then only had 240 yards last year with the Redskins. So that ended up being a big disappointment for Washington. They also brought in Andre Roberts, who is primarily, I believe, a special teams guy, and also Charles Johnson, who didn't even play last year. You know, had a decent year in 2014, but didn't even play in 2017. So that's probably not going to be a game changer there for the Jets. A bigger news for the Jets at wide receiver is that Quincy Enunwa will be back. He had a big second year in 2016, 857 yards, 4 touchdowns, but then missed all of last year with bulging discs in his neck. So that'll be a guy to keep an eye on to see, can he be healthy and can he bounce back this season, because he's in a contract year. So he's got a lot of incentive, but we'll see what he's able to do. At tight end, Safarian Jenkins is out, but he had, really the best year of his career, and it wasn't, he's no Gronkowski, right? So, but then who did they bring in? They brought in Clive Walford. You can see his numbers there with Oakland. Only had 80 yards receiving last year. The 2 prior years, he had 300 yards plus. So, he would be replacing sort of what they're losing with Safarian Jenkins, but, I don't know. Chris Herndon, they drafted him in the 4th round, and I believe that they recently just released Bucky Hodges, so he won't be on the roster after all, but, looks like they are taking a step back at tight end. At center, I mentioned earlier that Wesley Johnson was out as the starter, but that's not a huge loss. And in fact, they're bringing in Spencer Long. That's quite a big upgrade from Wesley Johnson. He went on IR last year with a injured quadricep tendon. But if he's healthy, he'll be a big upgrade. They gave him 4 years and $27 million. So we'll see what he's able to do and if he's healthy. But if he is, Spencer Long will improve that offensive line quite a bit. They also brought in Travis Swanson, who was a starter last year, I believe, with the Lions. But he had some concussions and wasn't very consistent. So overall, I'd say at center, definitely they'll be better off next season. Now let's look at the defense. As mentioned previously, Muhammad Wilkerson is gone. That's, maybe he didn't play very well last season, but that's still a big loss. He was a big time player, Pro Bowl caliber player in previous seasons. So losing Muhammad Wilkerson is not a small thing. They also lost Coney Ely, who is the number 3 defensive end. He was a key contributor. And also Ed Stinson won't be back. How are they going to replace those guys? Well, they're bringing in Henry Anderson, who had been a backup, I believe, with the Colts. Courtney Upshaw was a reserve defensive lineman with the Falcons for the last couple of years. Used to be a linebacker, I believe. How unusual is it for a linebacker to become a defensive tackle? Very interesting story. But, he's not going to be a game changer, but he might be able to provide a little depth. They drafted Nathan Shepard in the 3rd round. He'll be a guy that, can move around on the line, but might play more at end. And then they got Foley Fatukasi in the 6th round. He's going to be a guy who will be working with Mike Pennell and sharing reps there and competing for that job in the middle of that defense. To continue on, there's Muhammad Wilkerson's numbers. It's a big loss. Maybe not it's still a big loss. No matter how you look at it, it's a loss. At linebacker, Demario Davis is gone. All right, that's a really big loss from last season. Freddie Bishop is gone. He was a reserve kind of linebacker. And Julian Stanford is gone as well. He was also a reserve player that had 19 tackles. Who's going to replace these guys? Well, Avery Williamson, inside linebacker. He's going to be replacing Demario Davis as the starter. Kevin Pierre-Louis will also be coming in. Great backup player, 2nd string linebacker for the Kansas City. I think that's a really good addition to the team. 2 years, $6 million, not bad. They also brought in Kevin Minter, who was a backup last year with the Bengals. And finally, they brought in Neville Hewitt and then Brandon Copeland, who are more reserve players. But if you look at Kevin Pierre-Louis, had 41 tackles last year as a backup, played very well. One thing to be, concerned about, he was arrested for marijuana possession in the offseason. And whatever you may think about marijuana, the NFL doesn't like it. So that's something to keep an eye on. Kevin Minter was a big-time player with the Cardinals, had 81 tackles and 94 tackles. But then last year with the Bengals, missed some games with the elbow and hamstring injury. Did not have great numbers, so the Jets signed him for 1 year and $880,000. Hewitt had 64 tackles in 2016, but only 1 tackle last year. So they're looking for, both Hewitt and Minter to hopefully, have some bounce back years, but, we'll see. This is the interesting comparison. Look at Demario Davis's numbers. Look at Avery Williamson's numbers, because Williamson came in to replace Demario Davis. Demario Davis got 3 years and $24 million from the Saints. Avery Williamson got 3 years and $22.5 million from the Jets. You look at the numbers, Demario Davis had slightly better numbers. 135 tackles versus 92. 5 sacks versus 3, 9 tackles for a loss versus 4, but 29 years old. He's entering kind of the end of those prime years, whereas Avery Williamson's only 26 years old. So there's no doubt in my mind the reason the Jets decided not to match that deal with New Orleans is they're worried about how many miles Demario Davis has left. Very interesting comparison between the two guys. At cornerback, Marcus Williams and Robert Nelson were just reserve corners, didn't, play a ton of snaps. But where did that money go that the Jets spent on the offseason? certainly some of it went to Tremaine Johnson. 5 years, $72.5 million. That is number one corner money. You know, Tremaine Johnson was a really good corner with the Rams. They franchised him 2 years in a row, and they couldn't franchise him again. I guess couldn't match or didn't want to match the huge offer from the Jets. They knew they needed to improve their corner, their secondary, and so there they go. Boom, 5 years, $72.5 million. And they also drafted Perry Nickerson in the 6th round. So, you know, you can see that the Jets have really, I think, held steady on defense. At linebacker, overall, you know, they took a little bit of a step back with Avery Williamson, but they also brought in Kevin Pierre-Louis. So overall, the linebacker spot, you know, about the same. The defensive line, I don't know, they lost Wilkerson. Might have taken a little bit of a step back at the defensive line. Big upgrade, though, at corner with Tremaine Johnson. That's going to be pretty huge. He should be able to hopefully more or less shut down one side of the field. So, you know, overall, maybe the Jets improved a little bit on defense. Maybe improved a little bit on offense, depending on what happens at the quarterback position. But we'll see. You know, I don't think the Jets are a playoff team yet. But hopefully they made some long-term improvements to their team, and we'll see how it goes. So if you like this video, be sure to click subscribe. And let me tell you why. Because we, at the end of the preseason, are going to break down the roster of all 32 teams. And then each week, we're going to preview the upcoming week's games. And then in the middle of the week, we'll also review the previous week's game. So we are going to have some of the best coverage of the NFL on YouTube. Make sure that you click subscribe because you don't want to miss all this information that we're going to be giving out. So thank you so much, and click subscribe.